Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Lesli Doares.
It all seemed so perfect the day that you got engaged. Together you planned the amazing experience that would be your wedding day. Everything seemed perfect for a while until it wasn't. Now, you've heard your whole life that marriage is hard work, that it takes sacrifice and compromise. You've done all that, and nothing seems to get better. You know that living this way for another 10 or 20 years is impossible, but is divorce the only other option? Well, to help answer that question, I am joined by Rob and Roxanne Maroney. They have been helping couples rebuild their marriages for the past 15 years and are the authors of the new book, Hope After Hurt, From Heartache to Healing. So Rob and Roxanne, thanks so much for coming on the show and providing hope to people who might just feel a little hopeless.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lesli. I so appreciate you offering your listeners other options besides divorce, because that's what it seemed to me.
Yeah, a lot of people get caught up in it either has to, it's going to stay the same, which we don't want, or the only other option is to end it. But there is this third option, which you guys help with and I help with, which is how can people make it better? And, the truth is, and your book talks about this, that your guys' marriage has not always been sunshine and roses. So what was happening for you guys that almost made it a casualty of divorce?
Well, in my case, both my parents had been married 4 times each. I didn't know all their partners, but that didn't start me with a very good view of me. And I almost believed that divorce was inevitable. So I really thought, I'm never going to get married because why bother? But in answer to your question, I did get married eventually, and I think we were okay the first 10 years as we were having kids, and that kept us so busy. I don't think we really realized how slowly we were drifting apart. Mm-hmm. And then Rob started working more and more, and I started to feel very alone in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I would avoid my concerns at times, and then he would say, well, he's working for the family, and that I basically had unrealistic expectations. So we were both coming into the marriage kind of wanting something from our partner that we weren't getting, and we didn't know how to navigate that, how to change that, or even express our needs without just a complaint.
Well, when couples start...
Go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, when couples start looking at each other and leaning on each other to kind of suck the life out of one another to meet the need in their life, it's a recipe for disaster. And there's a number of factors, obviously, as you know and your listeners know, that are at work in a relationship that can cause a marriage to be at risk of divorce. And for us, the first dozen years of our marriage, we were in full-time ministry, and we left to go into the business world. And that next decade was that slow decline for us. But unlike Rocky's experience, growing up with divorced parents and an alcoholic parent, my view of marriage was different. My view was you could be unhappy, but you stay together. That's what I saw growing up in my family. My parents were married over 60 years, and they really functionally were kind of like roommates for many of those years. And so we started looking good on the outside, but like Rocky said, she was feeling alone and isolated in the relationship. But beneath the surface, there was really an erosion taking place.
Well, and you guys both phrase this so well, because what you're talking about are things that frequently happen. I mean, when kids come along, and bless them, I have 2 grown ones myself, so been there, done that. But they do take a lot of energy and effort, and time, and I hear you, Rob, say you're trying to work all these hours because your goal is to provide for the family, right? I mean, I remember working with a couple, and she had just had baby number 5 and already talking about baby number 6. And when she mentioned baby number 6, I just saw this look of panic go through this guy's face. He was already driving an hour each direction. He was on the road for 2 hours a day just commuting to work. And, and his thing was,
I was too.
Yeah, and he's saying, I love all my kids, but he says at the moment of their birth, he goes, I have this panic about how do I provide for them. So, I mean, this is real stuff that we're talking about. And you guys are both describing the legacy. I mean, Roxanne, when you say your parents each have been married 4 times each, I'm just like going, well, if that's not a warning flag. And Rob, you're talking about seeing your parents just be roommates, which again is frequently what happens. And it's like you guys talked about, it was very gradual. It didn't all of a sudden one day blow up. It was just like this, Chinese water torture thing.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Really, it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you also talk about not being able, how do you bring that up that doesn't just be just a litany of complaints, right? I mean, so this is like, so if anybody's listening, it's like, guys, if this is you're not alone in any of this. But it's kind of the cards that you were dealt.
Well, in working with men, they often resonate with the phrase, what you know about love and intimacy and connection and relationships was more caught than taught. And that was my experience. I wasn't taught these lessons of how to love and how to be an intimate partner. But what I caught was from a dad who was very emotionally absent, very isolating.
Yeah, and for you, that's normal, right? Because you don't know anything different when you're growing up. This is the way a man is supposed to be, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And in your book, you actually talk about, and I love this visual. When I read this, I went, oh my gosh, this is such a perfect visual. Because you were talking about what you brought into the marriage, and you guys weren't talking about, you guys were talking about baggage, but not like suitcases. You guys were each talking about trailers you were pulling, which I went, oh my gosh, that is such a great visual. So what was in each of your trailers that you brought with you?
Right. So I use that metaphor in the book, that on our wedding day we drove off pulling 2 invisible trailers full of stuff from our childhood that we really never worked through. We didn't know how to work through it. And so then as our trailers would collide and stuff would come tumbling out, we didn't know why. And so naturally I played, and I think Rob did too, we played the blame game that it must be my partner that's the problem. And that's an easy way out. So in my case, I longed for connection and unconditional love that I didn't get growing up, almost unrealistically so. And as well, I had triggers and sensitivities from events and traumas that did happen that I never worked through. I was always afraid Rob was going to leave me or die because I was left alone. My mom gave me TB when I was a baby, and so they had to put me in isolation when I was a little baby. I don't remember it, but I think it left a mark on my brain that people leave. So I had more of a demand that, I could tell that he was there for me and that he would be there for me no matter what. We sort of ignorantly believed that the past was in the past.
Yep.
But anything we bury alive, and it can pop up if the conditions are right, and they did with us. What was in your trailer?
Well, I love the metaphor of the trailers in the book, and the key word is the invisible part, because I didn't know that I was pulling this big trailer. And what we bring from the past, we refer to as our imprints. It's an imprint. Something happened to us, and it's the beliefs that we develop. They're based upon what we saw, heard, and experienced growing up in our families of origin. And one of my biggest imprints that I brought in my trailer was the belief that love is something that you have to earn. It's not given freely or unconditionally. And so I had to perform, and I had to measure up. I had to keep doing things that gave me the affirmation and the acceptance that in my soul I longed for, but as a kid I didn't know how to get. And so I didn't experience a whole lot of affirmation or emotional comfort in my family. I didn't have models for processing feelings or emotions. I didn't have a vocabulary for feelings. When she would ask me how I feel about something, I would say, well, I feel tired, or I feel hungry, or I feel on edge. But I had about 3 or 4 feeling words on my list, and that was about it. So I was very remedial in that area. And so my trailer was filled with a lot of broken understanding and wrong ideas about love and intimacy, which is what we talk about in the book. And so when you're constantly striving to be enough and to measure up, you're constantly performing. And when I couldn't fill that hole in my life, I started settling for false substitutes and for counterfeits, things like work, influence, meaning, alcohol, drugs, pornography, even all the above.
Yeah, I mean, and it is so critical. And Roxanne, you were talking about that must have been a horrible experience as a baby, being away from everything you knew in a hospital, and it's like not knowing, because all little kids think whatever goes on in the world is because of something they're doing, because they don't have that. I mean, it takes us a while to even get object permanence, that when mom walks out of the room, mom doesn't disappear. She still exists. She's just not in my personal space. But, I mean, and a lot of people wouldn't recognize what you went through as trauma. They would just think, oh, it's just something that happened, and it wasn't, I survived it, but it was traumatic, because it left an imprint on you, just to use Rob's words.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's how I thought, Leslie. I thought, well, I'm sure I was cared for. I'm sure there were people there to take care of me. It wasn't until I understood more about attachment theory and the things we learn in the first 6 years of our life are directly correlated to how we navigate romantic relationships. And so it took me until I was probably in my 50s till I realized and appreciated, oh, that left a mark. And not only did she leave me then, I think she was gone for a year then, because she had to recover from tuberculosis as well. But then she became an alcoholic later. So she left me again over and over. So that, I could pack it away and say, well, that's the history. That's gone now. I'm a Christian now, and I've got God, and that's all good and well. But it didn't. It didn't magically go away. I had to look at it, name it, realize the impact that it had on me.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I hear this a lot from my clients. It's like, oh, that was in the past, and it's over now. And I'm like, yeah, it's a fact that it comes up, and it can come up, and I love the way you describe it. It's like sometimes it just comes flying out of the closet. It's like, where the heck, what is this about? Why am I behaving this way, right? And and sometimes our family members, like whether it's our partner or our kids, will look at us like we have 3 heads. It's like, what the heck is going on here? Because I tell the story about my husband trying to throw me a surprise party, and he triggered my abandonment issues because my husband doesn't lie. He's a horrible liar, and I knew he was lying to me because he's trying to do this nice thing. And so when I finally find out about the surprise party, I had lost it, and literally my kids told me later, they said, Mom, we actually thought you went a little crazy that day. Because, and in truth I did. And for my next big birthday, my husband says, I'm not going to throw you a surprise party. I said, yeah, I know, I'm never getting a surprise party again. But I was convinced he was leaving me because he's getting secretive and he's lying, and it's like it's this crazy stuff. And Rob, you point out something that I think a lot of women do not understand, and I think it's critically important, that for a lot of men, because they have been disconnected from their feelings, from their emotion, that falling into this performance is really where they go, because that's, it's almost the second words out of somebody's mouth after they meet a man is, first off, what's your name? And then the second one is, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Not who are you, but what do you do?
Right.
And then you head into this having to perform.
Yeah, and I wrestle, and I still wrestle with that. That's still an issue for me of having to be enough, to measure up, to find my weight and other things, and that's something that I've learned to recognize and be aware of when it creeps up. But that voice can still start playing in my head at times that I need to do more or I need to do better, and sadly, in some ways, I guess, we live in a culture and we live in a Western world here that rewards performance and rewards standing out and being special and doing something unique and different.
Yeah, and I think the dynamic played out with us was I felt like I was fourth or fifth on the priority list. So he put more energy into work than he did into our relationship. So what does that mean about me? How important am I? Which was, again, a direct correlation to how I was treated as a kid. And so it was double whammy, in terms of my reaction to it.
And it was kind of a double whammy for me, too, in many ways, because in my family growing up, I mean, I'm not blaming my parents or my dad, but they didn't really go out of their way to give me a lot of affirmation or encouragement or push me into challenging things. And so that's how I grew up. And then I come into this world as an adult, and the first thing I do is I go into a ministry role. And for 12 years, I was in the ministry, which is not a very highly profitable career. And so when we did leave, I felt like I was a decade behind all my peers. And so I felt like I was playing catch-up.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Lesli Doares, and I'm talking with authors and marriage workshop leaders Rob and Roxanne Maroney about how to move your marriage from the brink of divorce to one that is truly loving, supportive, and intimate. And to be honest, no marriage is perfect, and it's not meant to be, but it shouldn't be a constant source of pain either. The choices aren't only to stay in a marriage that hurts or to end it. You can make the choice to learn how to make it better, and I can help you do just that. So I want to take a moment and invite you to contact me and schedule your free, no-obligation 5-star relationship call. You can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. Or you can send me an email at Lesli, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And I want to get back to talking with Rob and Roxanne about, guys, how did you turn things around? Because you hit the point where a lot of couples hit and they just decide we're too far gone. But how did you guys, first off, how did you recognize what the problem was? And then what did you do about it?
Well, it was a slow turn for sure. And I think we both had a resolute kind of mindset, even though divorce was always in my mind, not in Rob's mind, but in my mind because of my history. So I think we would probably have just stuck it out unhappily. But I became aware more at that point, maybe at 20 years in, of how my history was playing out and affecting me. And my mom was still alive at that point and still causing problems with her drinking and stuff. So I went to counseling, and I had to face some of the denial I had about my history and the beliefs that I formed, that I thought were no big deal. So I would say that we both started working on ourselves initially, sometimes with a counselor, sometimes not. And then as we grew in compassion toward ourselves and the stuff we were working on, as well as I started looking at his family and his dynamics and seeing what he didn't have growing up, we were able to start to connect the dots of our history to our present reactions. Not and you know this, we're not blaming our parents, we're not blaming histories as an excuse, but it is an explanation. And so we started looking for those explanations. So that's why we laid out our book starting with our histories, so hopefully others could see how their past might need to, they may need to look at their past too to see, well, how is that affecting me? So I would say it was sort of an individual venture at first, and then we had someone very lovingly get into our dynamic as a couple, and we're really thankful for that counselor. He was wonderful.
Well, it's a common phrase that healthy individuals make healthy couples. And the big turn for us, and it didn't happen at the same time, was that we had to start looking at our own stuff. Like Rocky said, we had to start our own repair journey. And I love how you challenge the thinking of your listeners on your podcast that there is another option. And most faulty thinking will take people to, there's only two choices. Either we live in an unsatisfying marriage that hurts, or we get a divorce. And there is another option. And the other option is to step into the pain, step into the chaos at times, and take the uncomfortable step.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that that's really what scares people, because we are products of where we came from, for good, bad, or otherwise, and it's not about blaming people. I am so with you guys on that, because most people just do the best they can with what they know and what they have, and and it's very hard sometimes to look outside and go, oh, here's this other option, But so when you're talking about, both your parents were married and divorced 4 times, which is not a good track record. Somebody would go, okay, are you just, what are you learning each time? Yeah. Or even, Rob, with you, that your parents didn't seem to have that deeper connection that we all need. It's not just that we want it. I mean, human beings need this connection. And so when we don't have it, it's like, well, what's going on? And trying to be able to take a look at what's happened. And because Roxanne, you were talking about this, and as a child of divorce myself, I'm very familiar with your children of divorce, like you say, I'm either never going to get married because it just doesn't work, or we have the flip side that if I get married, I'm never going to get divorced regardless. And then we get caught in these 2 pathways without seeing that there's a way to connect them. So I know that you guys have been working and offering workshops and practical things, because that's how, I'm all about practicality. Concepts are great, but if people don't have practical things to implement, then they just still get stuck. So what are some of the practical tools that you guys offer that couples can use to create greater connection and intimacy in their marriages?
Yeah, and, it may not be the same for every couple, but we found 6 areas that we needed to change in order to forge a healthier relationship between us. In our book, we put them in that order that we found ourselves, kind of working through them. And also we've worked with hundreds of other couples that seem to need it in this order. And here are the big areas that we would say broken in. And when we say the word broken, it wasn't that we think that we were awful bad people. It was just we had a false understanding of them, put it that way. So it started with a broken thinking, and then that led to our broken self-image. We had broken trust, broken intimacy, broken love styles, which is the attachment stuff, and then broken communication. And we did the communication last, which is kind of curious, but most couples come to us saying that communication is their biggest issue, and they just want us to help them get some tools to be better in that area. But if we don't address the triggers and the false beliefs and the reactivities first, they're not able to have a good conversation. They're not able to have good communication. So one of the most helpful tools is one that we use called a connecting conversation, and it's one that actually tries to tie your present reactions or stress reactions to maybe something that happened in your history. And it's a very simple kind of circular conversation that we have them do, a listener and a speaker. So you can explain a little bit more on that.
Well, all couples have patterns in their relationship, as you know, and the key is to learning to identify those patterns and recognize them and learn where the off-ramps are. And so when you get caught in your loop or your pattern, there's an off-ramp. There are many off-ramps, and they just drive by them, though. They keep It's like driving around in a roundabout. These neighborhoods that have built roundabouts, they're just going around and around and around. Why, how do I get off this circle? They say, well, you're passing all the main arteries every time you go around. And so most people just don't know how to slow things down enough to really listen to each other. And what we teach, and I'm sure you do too, is we teach a way to try to be attentive to the other person in a way that communicates that you're present, that you're available, that you hear them, you understand them, you express empathy and compassion. And one of the things that helped me is when we began to practice this kind of conversation with each other, I developed much greater compassion for Roxanne's story because I didn't grow up like that. But all of a sudden I had an awareness of her history, and I was grieved by it, and I was sad for her, and I could feel a deeper level of emotion, which was compassion for her.
And I love that, because compassion is truly the key. I think it's the key to bridge all kinds of gaps, whether it's in our marriages or our friendships or with our kids or with complete strangers, because, and even compassion for our parents, which sometimes can be hard, because it's like, can we see them as wounded people just struggling and not stand in judgment? So I just love that bringing compassion into these conversations. And so, Rob, I'm curious if there's anything that you could advise people about how to either develop compassion or tap into it, because sometimes we can be compassionate. A lot of times we can be compassionate to our kids in a way that we are not compassionate to our spouses.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a simple fix to this, but I would say one of the things that helped me was someone encouraged me to develop some compassion for my own story. And so when I could begin to see where I came from, because I categorized everything, like I began to understand the trauma of her past, and I would tell everybody for years, well, my childhood was pretty normal. It was like happy days. I was Richie Cunningham, and I had a friend named Fonz, and, nobody ever told each other. It was just understood. We didn't have to say those things. So I think one of the best ways to develop compassion is for guys like me who are kind of compassion challenged or empathy challenged to develop a much deeper feelings vocabulary. And so I had to develop words for what was going on inside me and recognize it. And so that's one of the key points in this connecting conversation that we teach people is learn how to say what you feel and what's going on at a deeper level.
Well, and Lesli, haven't you seen it, like when I've done couples counseling and I talk about a present thing that happened to them that caused them stress or emotions. And then when they ask the question, when have you felt that same way in your history growing up? All of a sudden the lights go on and they say, oh, my mom was always telling me that. Or I had an uncle that was, highly critical or abused me or whatever. And when they start to connect the dots of, oh, it's not just the current situation or it's not just my partner, it's something else too, then they can start attacking the problem and not each other. And he could see, when he saw the connection of my reaction of maybe abandonment to the abandonment as a baby, then it's like, oh, I can be more compassionate toward that when she does it in the present. But that simple conversation helps them kind of connect the dots. Not always, but often.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a really good first step, and it's interesting because I have learned, both with my clients and also personally, that self-compassion can often be the harder one to do because we hold ourselves to some, and obviously the standard we hold ourselves to was created probably in our childhood somewhere, that, it's like you were saying, Rob, that I had to earn love. That love was not something that that everybody is entitled to or everybody deserves just because they exist, but that somehow I have to perform in a way to be considered lovable. Now, that's not to say that all of our behaviors should not be, that all of our behaviors are lovable. No. So, Rob, especially, how do you help men identify? Actually get, or and it's not just men, but everybody to figure out what are the feeling words, because it's not like I feel hot, it's like, or I feel hungry. Because hungry is a state of being. It's not an emotion. So, right. Because a lot of times the emotional vocabulary is very stunted, very limited. So how do you expand that for people?
Well, most of the time I have to, we rely on actually a printed list. And I had a feelings word list that I carried around with me, and I think I may have put it on the refrigerator for a while, but it was a feelings word list, and they're readily available. That helps you begin to see. You start at the center, kind of with the primary emotion. Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling sad, depressed, moody, lonely? And then you work your way out, and it expands into dozens of other words that might relate to that. To make it simple, I think I kind of try to use acrostics, and one of them is HALT. You probably heard that, where when a guy is feeling triggered or energized by something that's going on and maybe pulling into some dysfunctional behaviors, I say, okay, ask yourself the HALT. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? And which of those might be triggering a behavior in me that I need to pay attention to? And so, but the feelings word list, I would say the expanded feelings word list was the most helpful thing for me. And we print it out and give it to clients.
Yeah, it actually is really great.
Haven't you, Leslie, heard people say, how do you feel in this relationship? And they'll say, well, I feel like, or I feel that. And they're not really saying a feeling at all. They're saying an opinion, which then, devolves into an argument. And so teaching people how to say a feeling word after they say, I feel lonely, or I feel confused, or I feel marginalized, or whatever. But they need a list sometimes to even stimulate those thoughts, because it doesn't readily come to their mind. Right. So, but I hear it everywhere. I feel like you care about me, and that's really not a feeling at all.
No, it's kind of hedging. It's kind of, because if we really say, I feel lonely, or I feel hurt, or I feel sad, and it could be actually hard for our partners to hear that, and they don't want us to feel that way. So that's a conversation for another day. So any other, before we wrap up, any other suggestions that you have for couples to try to turn things around?
Well, again, you and I would both be advocates of having a good counselor that can help you hear each other better and have a good conversation. But before we even had that, I think we saw 9 counselors at one point trying to find the right one. So I think finding someone that really can help you both see each other with compassion is huge. And then after that, we did weekly connecting questions that we would go down to the heart point, and we would kind of go through these questions that were like, how did you feel this week, or how did you experience me this week, or is there something stressful that's going on that I can help, pray for you, or I can help you with. And but you have to set aside that time, because it doesn't happen now to be kind of an appointed time. And that helped us a lot.
Leslie, people can try to enter into this and do something that can be very, very cumbersome and clunky and unnatural, and they want to be good at it, and they don't want to practice. And it's like, well, you can, if you help them understand how do you get good at anything? This is not natural. We weren't born really knowing how to do this on a deeper level. So taking the initiative to practice and to take those baby steps that don't always stay baby steps. Sometimes they stay as very important steps towards healing and restoration.
I love it. So can you share, first off, where they can find the book and any other information that you would like to provide the listeners?
Yes, thank you. Well, the book it came out just in August, so it's only been out a few months. The book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and most other major online book retailers. You can find out more about us at our website, which is eyesightcoaching.com. You know, our bios, our backgrounds in there, information about the book, links. You can also click on a link for a free sample of the book, and we make that available.
Terrific. Because as I've said before, no one has to take a relationship 101 class, but I truly believe that everyone should, because what you learn about relationships is often through personal experience. But every romantic relationship you've been in before your marriage has ended. So how are you going to keep this relationship going? Well, you can't if you only go by your past experiences. And doing the same things that resulted in the end of all of your other relationships will get you the same result with your marriage. Trust me on that. Believe me, I know that that's true. And so what I hope you guys will keep doing is I hope that you will keep listening to this show to learn how to do things differently. And until next week, stay loving.